Hello and welcome back to my channel, True Crime TV with Jenny Eastwood. Today we're covering part 3 of the Bain Family Murders, which is New Zealand's most controversial murder case to date. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I share new videos every week about an interesting true crime case from all over the world. So if you like this video, please go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. You can always change your mind later. Alright, let's get into it. So in part 1, we covered the discovery of the murders, David's strange behaviour and his eventual arrest. In part 2, we took a deep dive into the family's background, their strange relationships, and now we're going to take a look at the evidence against David and the evidence against Robin. So if you're not familiar with the story, I suggest you go ahead and watch part 1 and part 2 to make sure you're all caught up and know where we stand now. But in a nutshell, just to summarise, on June 20th, 1994, 22-year-old David Bain arrived back home to his house at 65 Every Street in Andersons Bay, Dunedin, New Zealand. He'd arrived home from his early morning paper run to find 5 members of his family shot dead in their beds. Police quickly concluded that it could only have been David or Robin, the father, who was responsible for the murders. So now we're going to rewind a little bit to before David's arrest and look at the days immediately following the shootings. Typically in cases of familicide, police look at the father first because statistically speaking, it's usually the father. And with the murder weapon being found right next to Robin Bain, he was the obvious starting point. If Robin was the killer, police had to reconstruct a series of events that would have taken place on the mornings of the murders. Robin's alarm clock had been set for 6:30 AM and had been switched off, indicating that he awoke at his usual time that day. Some bullet shells were found in Robin's caravan. He was also reading an Agatha Christie book with the story inside called Death Comes at the End. The story is set in ancient Egypt and is about a son who kills his entire family to inherit money. After waking up on the morning of the killings, Robin then entered through the back door after David had left for his paper run. He went to David's room where he took David's rifle and found the spare key in a jar on the desk to unlock the trigger lock. Robin then put on David's opera gloves and walked through the house, killing one family member after the other. The order of the killings has never been definitively proven, and if Robin Bain was in fact the killer, he took off his bloody clothes after the killings and placed them in a laundry basket downstairs before getting changed. He then went into the family living room, switched on the computer and typed his final message apologising to David, who would be the only surviving family member. Then, without switching on the lights, he put the shotgun on the floor, directed up towards his face. Although he was right-handed, Robin placed the barrel of the gun against his left temple, steadying it with his right hand and pulled the trigger. Investigators had to consider Robin's state of mind at the time of the killings. In part 2, we talked about everything that was going on in each of the Bain family's lives. This included Robin's deterioration and depression. By all accounts, Robin Bain's life was in turmoil. He did not have his admin sorted, his office, van and caravan were in a state, his marriage was a shambles, and people recalled his poor personal hygiene. In fact, it was something that many people noted after Robin had died, that he often had a very overpowering body odour. But was he in such a bad way that he would take not only his own life, but the lives of each of his family members? That is, all but one family member who he regularly clashed with. But there were a lot of things that did not make sense, and investigators couldn't rule out the possibility that Robin Bain was also a victim of David Bain. In the wake of shock and confusion after the deaths, the extended Bain and Cullen family came to Dunedin to support David and help him with the arrangements for the 5 funerals. David stayed with Margaret's sister and her husband in the days following the murders. His aunt obviously tried to make sense of what had happened and had many conversations with David, trying to figure out what went so horribly wrong in that family. During one conversation, David insisted that he wanted to read the local papers with the story about the murders. His aunt expressed that she thought that was a terrible idea and that it would only further his pain and trauma, but David was insistent. After he read the paper, he looked at his aunt and told her that they had lied to him. And she said, "What do you mean, David? Why have they lied to you?" And he said, "They told me that they died in their sleep, but they had to sit up and look their killer in the eye." When you look at the paper that prompted such a reaction from David that day, it simply says that 2 of the family members were found beside their beds. Following on from the reading of the newspaper, David seemed to have a breakdown. He was speaking incoherently and he kept saying, black hands, dying, Everyone dying. Black hands, I can't stop them. They came to take them away. It's just like Schindler's List. Black hands, dying all around, dying everywhere. His aunt was obviously very concerned, and she asked David if he had seen his family dying. David said no, he'd only seen his mum and dad, and they were already dead. His aunt was also curious as to why Laniet had been home during the shootings, because she'd moved out a year prior and was living at Tyree Beach. When she asked David why Laniet was home, he said he'd gone to the museum cafe where Arawa and Laniet worked and managed to convince her to come home for the night. A friend of Arawa, who also knew Laniet, said she'd seen Laniet outside the Playhouse Theatre in Dunedin at about 1:30 p.m. on the day before the murders. She'd gone to school with Arawa and Laniet and said they chatted about general things. When they began to talk about family, Laniet became stressed and intense. The conversation was along the lines of her disliking David and how he was freaky and she was scared of him. Laniet told a friend that David had called a family meeting for the night before the murders, and that if she did not go, he would take her kicking and screaming to the meeting if need be. When Laniet talked of the meeting, her face changed and she became quite intense. A defence witness said she'd met Laniet in the Octagon in Dunedin on the Thursday before the murders. They had talked for about half an hour. Laniet told her she was going home that weekend to blow the whistle on her working as a prostitute and having an incestuous relationship with her father. But Laniet had also said that David wanted to see the whole family together the weekend before the murders, but that she did not know why. David, however, denies any such meeting took place. As the family began making the funeral arrangements, David insisted that he be the one to make all the decisions. He wanted to be fully in charge of everything. He said what everyone had to wear in their open caskets, what music had to be played, and who was to say the respective eulogies. David himself wanted to sing at the funerals, which his aunt thought was very unusual given that it would be a very, very traumatic experience and you would typically expect to be experiencing a lot of grief at something like that. Although David told the court at his first trial that he had a wonderful relationship with his father, shortly after the killings he told his aunt that he hated his father. He said he was sneaky and listened into conversations that had nothing to do with him. He said his father wasn't accepting that he wasn't wanted and that he refused to leave his house and his family. David's aunt and a victim support counsellor were struck by how little emotion David showed in the week following the murders, and they were shocked when David wanted to arrange a party for Arawa, who would have turned 20 on the Sunday following the murders. But it wasn't only David's strange behaviour in the days following the deaths that made investigators uneasy about him. As they processed statements and evidence, more and more things pointed them towards David being the likely killer. David's account of his movements that morning were closely analysed. He said when he went to his mother's bedroom, he saw her lying on her bed, dead with her eyes open. But when officers found her body, her eyes were closed. Just off the lounge was an alcove that was used as a computer room. A heavy velvet curtain separated the two spaces. In processing the scene, investigators found a spent shell casing behind the velvet curtain, suggesting that the gun was fired from that position. They speculated that David could have waited for his father to come in, kneel down for his morning prayer, and then shoot him from his position behind the velvet curtain. In revisiting the scenario of Robin being the killer of the family, investigators realised that there was, in fact, very little actual evidence to prove that Robin had done it. If he had done it, his actions were quite the contradiction. Why would he use his son's rifle and gloves, knowing that it could implicate him? Why wear gloves at all if he was intending to end his own life? And why would he choose to spare David when most people who knew the family know that David and Robin clashed badly? Robin was well read and known to be a quiet thinker. He was a teacher and loved literature. And if he was planning to leave this world in such a dramatic fashion, one might think that he would leave a slightly more poetic suicide note, and most likely, being from his generation, a handwritten one. But all he left was a typed one-liner written on the family computer in past tense. It was certainly odd and considered to be a little bit out of character for what they might have expected from Robin. Friends and fellow students told police that David Bain displayed odd behaviour in the days leading up to the murders. 2 or 3 weeks before the killings, fellow music student John Mowat was in a compulsory choir session with him. During the singing, David had suddenly become upset and climbed over him, kicking him in the shoulder as he left his place. David then sat at the back of the room with his fists clenched like he was pacifying himself. He started rocking back and forth. On June 11th, David went to a Dunedin Sinfonia concert with his new girlfriend. He zoned out for an entire movement, not even responding to his girlfriend's elbow prod. Later, he confessed the deja vu was happening every second day in the week before the deaths of his family. In the week before the murders, David told his friends that he had a premonition that something terrible was going to happen. In the week after the shootings, his friends asked him if that was the terrible event that he had thought was going to happen, and he said yes. David said that he arrived home from his paper round at 6:42 a.m, yet he'd only called 111 at 7:09 a.m, which left a 25-minute window. David said he went to his room, kicked off his shoes, went down to the laundry, back to his bedroom, then discovered his mother and then his father. Other than that, he had no recollection for what had occurred during that 25-minute window. He told investigators about the incident at the Sinfonia concert and said that he believed he may have blacked out again. And there was another strange inconsistency that was picked up by investigators. David said that he discovered his mother's body and then called for his dad because he was scared. He went to go and look for his father and found his body in the living room. He did not go around the house looking for his siblings. And yet, when he called 111, he said they are all dead. How did he know that they were all dead if he hadn't gone to check on his siblings? Mark Buckley, a friend of David Bain's, came forward and told police about the rape fantasy he'd confided in him about the girl that lived across the road. He told them of how he said he could get away with it by using his paper run as an alibi. Also, a week before the shootings, Margaret told a friend that she was concerned about David because he was having hallucinations and dark premonitions. Margaret also told her sister that she was going to speak to David about how he was treating his siblings. Apparently, Margaret felt that it wasn't his place to tell them what to do. They already had a father, and David needed to know his place. One of David's closest friends and his father went to visit David in the days following the murders. The father described how David was behaving very, very strangely. He would get so close to the father that every time the dad took a step back, David would step into his space. Eventually, the father had to step up onto the couch just to create some space between him and David. David eventually backed off and went and sat in a chair, staring at a single spot on the wall. He avoided eye contact completely for the entire time that they were there. When the two left, David's friend went home and shut himself in his bedroom crying. When his mother went in to check on him, he said, "He did that, Mum. The bastard killed his family." David's behaviour towards his close, long-time friend was so odd that it was enough to convince him that he had done it. But all of this was purely hearsay and circumstantial evidence, and police knew they needed a lot more if they wanted to arrest David Bain for these killings. But the physical evidence wasn't hard to find. 4 of David's bloody fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, which also happened to be David's own Winchester semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle. There was also a palm print on the silencer made by Stephen, probably as he tried to push the gun away. When David was found by police, there was no blood on his hands. Also, there was no blood on the phone that he'd used to call emergency services. By his own admission, he had washed his hands in the laundry, but it seemed that it wasn't only black ink from the newspapers that had been on David's hands. In the laundry, there were blood smears on the washing machine, as well as the laundry detergent box. A small drop of blood was found in the washing basin. A green sweater washed by David that morning matched fibres found under Stephen's nails. At first, David said the sweater was Arawa's, but later he changed his story and said that the sweater belonged to Robin. That same sweater had rubbed up against door frames, leaving blood smears throughout the house. David had injuries on his forehead and a scrape to his knee. His knuckles were reddened and he had a scrape mark on his chest. David could not explain these injuries. Police concluded that they were most likely from the struggle with Stephen. What strengthened this theory was that on the clothes that David was wearing when the police arrived, there were specks of blood that matched Stephen's. David's bloodied opera gloves as well as a lens from a pair of glasses were found in Stephen's bedroom. In David's bedroom, there was a pair of glasses that was missing a lens. In terms of Stephen's blood that was detected on David when police officers arrived at the scene, his t-shirt had blood on the lower front and back, and on the upper back. His shorts had a bloodstain on the crotch, and blood was found on the soles of his socks. Droplets of blood were also found on the top of David's socks. 5 bloodied sock footprints were found in Margaret's room. Then the track led into Laniet's room and backed out again. 4 days after the family shootings at 65 Every Street, police arrested David Bain.
In a dramatic turn, 22-year-old David Bain was this afternoon led into the district court. He's accused of shooting his entire family in cold blood. David Bain showed no emotion when he made a brief appearance in court late this afternoon. He entered no plea and was remanded in custody until July the 8th. Relatives leaving court tonight would not comment on the twist. Have you got any reaction to the arrest today?
No, let's leave it, mate.
When initially questioned by police, David Bain told them he discovered the bodies after returning from his morning newspaper round. Dead were his sisters Arawa and Laniet, his brother Stephen, and his parents, father Robin Bain and mother Margaret Bain. Since the shootings, he's believed to have been staying at this house with relatives. Police arrested him at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Tonight, police issued a brief media statement on the case, but would make no further comment. Police have kept their options open, but at one stage they told 3 National News they had ruled out David Bain as a suspect.
Well, he was never a suspect, but we've got an open mind about the whole situation. We've been talking to him again this afternoon, and the detectives that went to see him haven't arrived back yet, so I haven't spoken to them. But I understand that he is coping as well as one could expect under these very difficult circumstances.
However, they were generally more cagey on who committed the killings.
I've already said I'm not prepared to speculate on what's happened there until all that information is to hand.
Detectives had intensified their search at the scene in recent days. They've beefed up staff numbers as they catalogued a vast number of exhibits. Public speculation had centred on murder-suicide, but tonight David Bain is in a Dunedin cell charged with murdering all 5 members of his family. Richard Langston, 3 National News.
When police put the evidence to him and asked if the missing 25 minutes explained the murders, David had this to say, quote, "It's a question of what happened to me. After I saw my father, I remember seeing my family being pulled away by black hands. I told Greg Dunn that I'd had a blackout recently at a concert." End quote. David then asked for a solicitor. At 1:46 p.m, David was officially charged with 4 counts of murder. He did not attend the funerals of his 5 family members the next day, as he was remanded in custody. During the first days of custody, David had various fits and blackouts. Police felt he was faking it, but they were still required to send nurses and doctors to assess him. One of the prison officers was a good friend of David's because he had been good friends with his son. He had taken some time off work after the shock of hearing that David had been in custody. When he arrived back to work, he heard that David was having a fit. He went and visited David in his cell, where David was currently fitting. When the officer told him to cut it out, David stopped immediately. He turned to him and said, "Oh, I didn't realise you were on today," as though nothing had happened. The officer then told David, "David, you don't have fits, stop doing it," and David never fitted again in jail. This is quite significant because when ambulance officers and police first arrived on the scene on the day of the murders, David had been presenting as though he was having fits, but none of the first responders thought that his fits were genuine. On the 5th of July 1994, just 2 weeks after the murders of the Bain family, the Bain family home at 65 Every Street was burnt down by the New Zealand Fire Service.
A fiery end for a house that the Bain Family Trust said could no longer be left standing. 5 members of the family were shot dead within its walls. Today it was destroyed. Fearing someone would set it alight in anger, relatives asked the fire service to do the job properly. Within minutes, the old wooden house was engulfed in flames. I'm standing more than 100 metres away from the fire, yet I can still feel the intense heat of the flames. The house was consumed by towering flames for more than an hour. The fire could be seen over most of the city. It burned 17 days after Arawa, Laniet and Stephen Bain were killed, along with parents Robin and Margaret. Relatives say they did not burn the house for emotional reasons or to cleanse the property. It was the quickest way to make way for a sale. But neighbours were glad to see it go.
I think it's a good thing because, you know, there's a lot of real bad memories.
The house was a bit of a menace, really, just sitting there. And it was going to be done sooner or later by somebody.
The legality of the fire has been questioned by one law expert who doubts that the legal loose ends, such as who owned the house, have been tied up. But a trustee told 3 National News that the only surviving member of the Bain family and the man charged with the 5 murders David Bain, agreed to the house being razed. He had told them he never wanted to see the house again. For the fire service, it was an unusual operation.
We treated it as a humanitarian exercise only. The family concern was obviously that there would be vandalism.
The Bain's long-term plan had been to build another house on the property. It will probably happen in time, but that task will now fall to someone else. Richard Langston, 3 National News.
However, this decision was later called into question because there was a lot of evidence that hadn't been preserved at the time and possibly could have solved this case many, many years ago. David Bain's first trial began on 8th of May 1995. 60 witnesses were called to testify. By this point, the entire country of New Zealand was absolutely hooked on the story of the Bain family killings. Things like this just do not happen here, especially not in a place like Dunedin. Everybody was curious and dying to know what had gone on inside the Bain household. David wore sweaters that his mother had knitted him when she was still alive to court. The sweaters that were colourful and outrageous quickly became a cultural icon in New Zealand. The Bain case was built largely on circumstantial evidence, and as judges often tell juries, each piece of circumstantial evidence is like a strand of rope. One strand alone may be too flimsy to hold the weight of a conclusion, but it gathers strength as more strands combine with it to provide a compelling picture. David testified in his own defence, saying that he loved his family deeply and that they were all very close. He painted a very different picture of the dysfunctional family that the people of the court and throughout New Zealand had heard about the Bain household. He said that he loved and respected his father. The prosecution described David Bain as a disturbed young man who displayed unusual behaviour. The only other possible perpetrator, the prosecution said, could have been Robin Bain. But based on expert pathological evidence, Robin was ruled out as a suspect. Firstly, there was no blood on Robin's shoes or socks. His fingerprints were not on the rifle, and there were no traces of gunpowder on his hands. Robin was right-handed, but the fatal bullet wound was to his left temple, which was also unusual. The Crown's case stated that on the day of the murders, David Bain got up at 5 AM and got dressed for the day. Then he took his .22 caliber Winchester rifle from the wardrobe in his room. He unlocked the trigger lock with a spare key that was left in a jar on his desk. The original key was usually kept on a string around his neck, but he'd recently taken part in the annual Dunedin Polar Plunge, and he'd left the original key in the pocket of his anorak, which he'd also left in his dad's van. After unlocking the trigger lock, he made his way through the house. He shot his mother and siblings, one after the other. 14-year-old Stephen had fought back hard. A struggle ensued, which is why Stephen was strangled with a t-shirt before he was shot. During the fight, a lens from David's glasses came loose and fell on the floor. After he was done, David noticed the blood on his clothes and went downstairs where he undressed and put his bloodied clothes in the washing machine. He switched it on and left the house at 5:45 AM to do his paper round. On this particular day, he wasted no time and was back home an hour later at 6:42 AM. He switched on the computer at 6:44 and wrote the sorry note to appear to have been written by Robin. He then waited for his father to come inside like he did every day at 7 AM. Robin would make his way from his caravan to the house and into the lounge where he would say his daily morning prayer. Usually, he also went on the computer to check his emails. As Robin knelt down, David shot him at a very close range. Then he staged the scene to look like a suicide. After preparing for his next actions in the 25-minute window, David called emergency services, reporting the killings and feigning extreme distress. Now, by the time David's first trial rolled around, he had recalled a few memories to account for that missing 25-minute window of time. One of these memories involves him discovering Stephen's body and being in Laniet's room, where he said he saw blood all over her face and heard her gurgling. So obviously the prosecution had many questions about this. Laniet's gurgling implied that David must have been there just moments after she was shot. In fact, most likely in the immediate aftermath. And if Laniet was still alive, why didn't he get help right then and there? Gurgling would suggest signs of life, any sign of life. So why didn't David go straight to the phone right then and phone 111? The Crown prosecution concluded their case saying that only one person could have heard Laniet gurgling. That person is the murderer. The question of motive has always been a contentious issue in this case. and the prosecution never managed to provide a compelling reason for why David Bain would kill his entire family. However, in the end, it didn't matter. After deliberating for just 9 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all 5 counts. David Bain was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 16 years.
In his first telephone interview from Papadua prison, the man convicted of killing his parents, 2 sisters and brother said it's a crime he didn't commit.
I know that I did not do it. I know that completely, there is no question about that. I mean, I've done a lot of soul searching and wondering if I did, whether I did it in a blackout or not, but I know I did not do it. So, I mean, it only leaves my father, doesn't it?
Bain said he'd suffered greatly with the deaths of his entire family.
There was a great deal of pain. It was as if a huge hole had just been ripped out of my, insides. And I guess I will always feel that hole, and there won't ever be anything that will fill that gap again.
Bain said he had no faith in the justice system and wouldn't be able to cope if his appeal fails.
I think that would be pretty much on the brink of me going over the edge, because it is the last chance that I have, that I know I am not the monster, the perpetrator of this whole thing that I've been portrayed as.
Bain's lawyer, Michael Guest, will tomorrow tell the Court of Appeal a section of evidence ruled inadmissible should have been put before the jury. The appeal's expected to take 1 day. Justine Short, 3 National News.
However, towards the end of David's first trial, some shocking new evidence came to light. Police learned about Laniet's friend and pimp, Dean Cottle, who we talked about in depth in part 2. Laniet's phone was registered in his name, and police felt that he was a significant person in her life. They had questioned him a couple of days after the murders. He told investigators that when Laniet left her home, she'd begun working as a sex worker. She told Dean that her father had frequent sexual intercourse with her, starting when the family lived in Papua New Guinea. Laniet was only 13 when the family had moved back to New Zealand, so this claim was very, very serious, especially considering that Robin was a teacher of young children at the time. Not long before her death, she found a job at the museum cafe. Laniet was hoping to make a fresh start, and she told Dean that she was totally done with her family. However, this evidence wasn't heard at court during David's trial. Dean failed to show up in court, so the judge ruled him an unreliable witness. Dean's evidence was considered to be hearsay and was thrown out of the case. A month after the trial, with David in prison, Dean Cottle provided an affidavit that could have drastically changed the outcome of the case. Dean said that on Friday, June 17th, Laniet Bain had told him that she was going home that weekend to tell her family about her father's abuse. She said that she'd had enough and wanted to put a stop to it. Like the rest of Dean's information, the jury at David Bain's trial never heard this information. It could have been the most damning evidence pinpointing a motive for why Robin Bain might have killed his family. After Dean's post-trial evidence, more and more people came forward corroborating his story. Many of the strangers who Laniet had confided in told of how she had said that she was having an inappropriate sexual relationship with her father. Dean Cottle understood that Laniet was being abused by her father, but the others clearly remembered her implying she was having an incestuous affair. But also, Laniet had a well-established history of making startling claims. In high school, she told her PE teacher how she'd had a baby in Papua New Guinea, and then later changed her story to say that she'd had an abortion. She also said that she tried to kill herself by slitting her wrists and that her sister Arawa had saved her. There was no evidence to support these claims that she told the teacher, and she never mentioned them again. She also didn't tell these stories to anybody else. And it also begs the question, why would Laniet voluntarily live with her father at Tyree Beach if she was afraid of him because he was abusing her? Was she manipulated by him to such a degree that she felt a sense of duty towards him? Also, why was she always the one to stick up for her father when the rest of the family would turn on him? Many people believe that justice was served and that David Bain was the one that killed his family that day. But former All Black turned lawyer Joe Karam took an interest in the David Bain case and started a campaign to have his conviction overturned. Karam felt that David's case was one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in New Zealand history. In David Bain's first appeal, his defence demanded to know why Dean Cottle's evidence was thrown out in the first trial. The appellant judge ruled that the initial judge had acted correctly and that the evidence was clearly inadmissible. In New Zealand, the last resort of appeals is currently the Supreme Court. But because the crime and sentencing occurred before 2004, David could still appeal to the Privy Council in Britain. This is the highest court of appeal in certain British territories like New Zealand, and David Bain's case was the last New Zealand case ever heard by the Privy Council. The Privy Council considered the David Bain case in May 2007. David's defence team, including Joe Karam, presented 9 points of contention, proving at least reasonable doubt. The 9 points were all vital pieces of evidence that were never raised during David's trial back in 1995. The first point that David Bain's defence team presented to the council was that Robin Bain's mental health and state of mind was never presented to the jury during the first trial. In fact, he was said to be a dedicated teacher, devout Christian, and very hands-on parent. However, president of the Taieri Principals Association, Kevin McKenzie, had a very different impression of Robin Bain. He said that he'd visited Robin's school in Taieri after the murders. He was shocked when he discovered the disorderly state of Robin's office. It was messy and dirty, there were heaps of unopened letters everywhere, kind of like an extension of the Bain family house. But the most disturbing thing he found was a recent newsletter that had been sent out to families of the school. It included stories written by Robin's students, all of which were brutally violent. The theme? Serial murders of family members. Kevin felt that the kids had to have been instructed to write these stories, as it was unlikely that they conceptualized them on their own. This, of course, is only speculation. Another psychologist felt that the theme could have been inspired by watching a film together in class. Either way, the fact that Robin Bain felt it appropriate to publish these stories at all is shocking to say the least. Kevin McKenzie said that the stories serve as the clearest possible evidence that Robin Bain had lost touch with reality due to his mental state. Cyril Wilden, a teacher and psychologist, visited the school from time to time and became aware of Robin's troubles. He noticed that Taieri's principal was becoming more and more disorganised, so much so that Cyril concluded that Robin was clinically depressed. The second point raised to the Privy Council was the lack of motive in the case against David Bain. It was also pointed out that the evidence of Laniet's alleged abuse was never stated during David's initial trial. And multiple witnesses corroborated the story that she was in an incestuous, abusive relationship with her father, Robin. One version of the story was that Laniet was pregnant after being abused by her father and had had an abortion. The incident is said to have happened in Papua New Guinea when Laniet would have been 13 or younger. A witness claimed that Laniet said, "I can't stand what he's doing to me any longer." Laniet knew that the whole family would be together that Sunday night. Whether it was David who arranged it or Laniet herself, it does not change the fact that she saw an opportunity to speak up about the abuse. She told Dean Cottle she was going to put a stop to everything. In response to the first 2 points, the Privy Council stated that, quote, "If the jury found Robin to be in a deep state of depression and now a school principal and ex-missionary facing the public revelations of very serious sex offences against his daughter, they might reasonably conclude that this could have driven him to commit these acts of horrific and uncharacteristic violence. The jury might, not extravagantly, have felt that this evidence put a new complexion on the case." Unquote. The third issue presented to the Privy Council was the footprint evidence. Bloody footprints made by the right foot of someone wearing socks started in Margaret's room and went into Laniet's room. The print was always considered to be David's as he was wearing socks that morning. The footprint measured 280 millimetres. But this is where the problem came in. Robin's feet measure 270 millimetres, while David's measure 300 millimetres. The evidence of the footprints became a big contention. If the defence could prove that the footprint was Robin's, they could prove that he changed his clothes after the killings, and before ending his own life. That would explain the lack of blood found on him when he was discovered in the living room. It would also mean that he'd placed the bloodied clothes in the washing basket in the laundry, which David had inadvertently put in the washing machine when he returned home from his paper run. That could also explain the blood smears found on the laundry detergent if David had handled the bloodied clothes. Tests showed that, typically, a bloodied sock would make a print slightly larger than the size of the actual foot, meaning that if David had left the prints, they would have been larger than 300mm, but certainly not smaller. However, because police did not remove the pieces of carpet, this vital piece of evidence was lost when the house was burnt down and could not be re-examined. The Privy Council ruled that it was an assumption that David made the footprints and that Robin could not be ruled out as being the person who walked between the bedrooms. Another point of contention was the time at which the computer was turned on in the living room. In the prosecution's case against David, they argued that he had killed 4 members of his family before leaving for his paper run at around 5:45. He returned almost an hour later at 6:42 a.m. The computer was switched on at 6:44 a.m. This was considered to be the correct time during the first trial. However, on further investigation, experts agree that the computer could actually have been turned on as early as 6:39 a.m. before David was even home. This meant that it could reasonably have been Robin who turned the computer on. On the other hand, the switch on time could also have been later than 6:44 a.m, meaning it could have been David. Either way, because of the contentious nature of the evidence, the Privy Council concluded that it should not have been used in proving David's guilt. I just want to sidebar here as a personal note. Personally, I am not really sure why it would matter if the computer was turned on earlier if David had written the note. It could reasonably have been on already and then he could have written on it. But anyway, I agree, shouldn't have been used in the trial. The 5th point raised to the Privy Council was the exact time that David came home. Having a definitive timestamp would have carried great relevance with regards to the computer switch on time. Denise Laney saw somebody resembling David Bain entering the gates of 65 Every Street at around 6:45 a.m. She gave a second statement too, saying that the person had a yellow bag over his shoulder, like David's delivery bag. She said she looked at the clock in her car and it read 6:50, but she knew that it was set ahead of time. Police did a time check and concluded that it must have been 6:45. Denise Laney said that seeing David at the gate further along the route than she usually saw him made her think that she was running late. But because the clock in her car was running ahead, she was actually right on time. Again, in a case where minutes could change the outcome, it's a shame that officers did not time check David's watch. The computer was switched on sometime between 6:39 and 6:40. David said he was home at 6:42, yet he was seen arriving home at 6:45. During the first trial, jurors were informed that Denise Laney's evidence was seen as an estimate, and jurors were not informed that police conducted a time check on the clock in her car. The Privy Council felt that, quote, the reliability of the time evidence was a matter for the jury, who never heard the full evidence and never heard Ms. Laney cross-examined, because the defence did not know her clock had been time-checked by the police and did not know that she'd made a second statement. The fresh evidence might lead a reasonable jury to infer that her identification was not in doubt and her estimate of time reliable, unquote. The timing of David's arrival home was vital evidence. If he arrived home 5 minutes later, he could not have switched on the computer. It could only have been Robin. It would also make the long window of time between him arriving home and calling 111 a lot shorter, fitting the story of his movements. He went to his room, kicked off his shoes, and hung up his delivery bag. Then he went downstairs to wash his hands and start the washing machine cycle. From there, he went upstairs and only then did he check on his mother, found her body in her bed, then fled to the living room where he discovered his father. Because of the layout of the house, he could not have walked past any of the bedrooms on his way to the laundry. So it's not strange if he didn't notice any of the carnage in the other rooms. Point number 6 that was presented to the Privy Council was about the lens found in Stephen's room. David Bain was short-sighted and always wore glasses. In his bedroom was a set of frames with a lens in the right side. The left lens was found in Stephen's room. The main argument was that the lens had come loose during David's struggle with his brother Stephen. David said that the glasses belonged to his mother Margaret. The family optometrist stated that the prescription was similar to one he'd given David 2 years before the crimes. The optometrist did say that it wasn't identical, but the implication was made that it could have been David's glasses. However, when the optometrist saw a photo of Margaret Bain wearing the exact same glasses, he said that he'd made a mistake and that Margaret had a similar prescription to David. The optometrist read a transcript of his first testimony during the first trial. He realised that the jury had not been informed of his corrected statement. The next point brought to the Privy Council was also related to the glasses. Testimony by Detective Ware regarding the lens found in Stephen's room was misleading. He said that the lens was lying on the floor out in the open, but in actual fact it was under an ice skating boot, under a jacket and covered in dust. David's supporters believed that the evidence of the lens was planted in Stephen's room by Detective Ware. In the end though, while it was concluded that Ware's testimony was misleading, it was not done intentionally. The frame and both lenses were tested. No blood, hair, fingerprints, or human tissue were found on either. So in the end, it's irrelevant who the glasses belonged to and where the lens was found, as it was not considered to be a piece of evidence in the case. The eighth point discussed by the Privy Council was arguably the most damning piece of evidence in the entire case. That was David's bloodied fingerprints found on the murder weapon. 5 prints were on the forearm of the rifle. At the time of the first trial, it was assumed that the blood was human blood. However, when it was tested 3 years later, results indicated that the blood was not necessarily human. In fact, no human DNA could be detected. The defence argued that the fingerprint was more likely an old one. David had hunted rabbits and possums in the months before the murders and could not recall cleaning the gun after that. The last issue of the 9 points raised to the Privy Council was that the Crown's closing statement in 1995 at the trial that only the killer could have heard Laniet gurgling was also misleading. They had said only one person could have heard Laniet gurgling, and that person is the murderer. But actually this is not 100% true. It could actually have occurred later. The defence showed expert testimony saying that post-mortem gurgling is actually a proven phenomenon, albeit a rare one. After considering the entire case, the Privy Council reached its final conclusion. They stated, quote, "In the opinion of the board, the fresh evidence adduced in relation to the 9 points, taken together, compels the conclusion that a substantial miscarriage of justice has actually occurred in this case." Unquote. The Privy Council sent the case back to New Zealand, suggesting a jury, not an appellate court, consider all evidence in this case, including the 9 points. They raised some arguments, stating that there was still a chance that David was guilty. Firstly, the spare key that was used to unlock the trigger lock. Was there evidence to prove that Robin Bain knew where David kept the spare key? Also, David's blood on his opera gloves. They were found in Stephen's room and needed to be explained. The timing of the washing machine cycle was also contentious, because officers didn't make a note if the washing machine was still going when they arrived. Additionally, David's head injuries couldn't be explained. And Robin had no defensive wounds whatsoever to suggest that he'd gotten into a scuffle with his youngest son, Stephen. Another contentious issue is that at the time of his death, Robin Bain had a full bladder. It seems unlikely that an older man, frail as he was, would commit these horrific acts without at least relieving himself first. For these reasons, the Privy Council felt that a full retrial was necessary, and that David Bain had to remain in prison until the retrial. Despite this recommendation, the New Zealand High Court in Christchurch released David Bain on parole on the 15th of May 2007. He was released into the care of Joe Karam. He had served just 13 years of his life sentence.
Kia ora, good evening. David Bain is to face a retrial. The Solicitor General made the announcement this afternoon, 13 years and 1 day after Bain's family was found dead in their home in Dunedin. Shortly we'll hear from Kate Lynch on how the retrial will work. But first, Tristram Clayton joins us live from Te Kaupata, where Bain is living with his biggest supporter, Joe Karam. Tristram.
Mike, the pair heard the news here at home in Te Kaupata just about an hour and a half ago. This is how they broke the news to the media. On the shortest day of the year, it came as the darkest possible news.
What's the news, Joe? The Solicitor General has decided to proceed with a retrial, and he's given very brief reasons for doing so, and respect must be taken of his decision. He's very seriously pointed out the issues relating to contempt of court, which means it's not appropriate to discuss evidence or possible verdicts and anything of that nature.
Joe Karam broke the news to reporters outside his Te Kaupata house.
It's been a very long road to clearing David's name. I think we've made marvellous progress in the last few years. It looks like the final step's just going to take a little bit longer than what we thought.
You did always suspect this though, didn't you?
Well, of course, it was provided for in the Privy Council decision. I mean, they didn't say there shouldn't be and they didn't say there should be. They've left it up to the authorities. The authority is the Solicitor General, and the Solicitor General has made his decision.
But amongst the gloom, some good news. A job for Bain at one of the local businesses.
It's with PGG Wrightson's here in Te Kaupata, and they've very kindly offered to give me just some casual work just to help me settle into the place. I'm really looking forward to getting involved in it and just finding some, as I said earlier on, some normality in life. So.
Do you know what you'll exactly be doing at this stage?
A little bit of stock maintenance, maybe a bit of administration. I've only just set the job, so it'll be taking place probably in the next week or two.
But for the moment, Bain's mind is elsewhere.
We've just been out for a game of golf, and I'm just going to relax at home, and we'll discuss all the ramifications of things for the future, but I've got a real good support team here.
Mike, I was standing in this very spot 6 weeks ago when the news came through that David Bain had been granted bail. On that occasion, there were cheers and shouts of joy coming from in the house. There was even tears of joy. Today, none of that. Not a great lot of emotion either way, but a kind of steely determination to see the job through, to get the job finished.
2 years later, in June 2009, David Bain's retrial commenced at the High Court in Christchurch. Once again, the case garnered national attention. It became a much discussed topic across the country, and Google later revealed that the name David Bain was the top searched New Zealander for 2009. Once again, David Bain pleaded not guilty. The prosecution stuck to the original theory that David had shot and killed his family members in the pre-dawn hours of June 20th, 1994. They also tried to prove that Robin Bain was not the killer. They questioned how a downtrodden Robin, who had been described by a friend as a walking cadaver, could possibly have killed his whole family. The prosecution also brought up the point of David's blood-stained gloves found in Stephen's bedroom. They questioned the defence's claims that Robin had been the one to wear them. It didn't seem to make sense that Robin would wear gloves if he was planning on ending his own life anyway. It also pointed out that the fingerprints found on the rifle did not have any blood on them. That indicated that David was holding the weapon, fired it, and blood spattered over his hand to parts of the gun where he was not holding it. The prosecution stood firm in the opinion that the fingerprints were made on the day of the murders and not previously. Regarding Robin's full bladder, a post-mortem autopsy showed that his bladder had been full and his urine dark, which is consistent with an overnight buildup. The prosecution did not think it plausible that Robin Bain could have gone through the whole house, killing his whole family without relieving himself first. The argument was that Robin more than likely woke up, went into the place where he knelt down for his morning prayer in the living room before starting his day. A day that he would never get to live. But the defence felt that the urine evidence was nonsensical. They argued that, quote, there is medical evidence that people overlook any urge to urinate in a stress situation, unquote. Robin also had a slightly enlarged prostate, which was not uncommon for people of his age. The defence team consulted an expert urologist who concluded that the amount left in Robin's bladder, about 1.5 cups, could have been left over after urination. This issue is just another one of the contentious points that people will most likely never agree on with regards to this case. As for the fight with Stephen, Robin Bain did have injuries on his hands, but they'd already begun to heal, so he had most likely sustained these injuries while doing repairs to the property on the Saturday morning. However, Australian pathologists were also asked to look at the wounds, and they came to a different conclusion. Joe Karam listed the findings in an interview with the New Zealand Herald on Sunday. He pointed out that both of Robin's hands showed severe injuries. Quote, on his right hand, abrasion to the knuckle of the middle finger, back of the ring finger, and a large bruise to the back of the hand to the rear of the middle finger. On the left hand, a big abrasion to the knuckle of the thumb, 2 abrasions to the left index finger, 1 at the knuckle region, and 1 at the top joint area," unquote. David's defence team doubled down and firmly argued that Robin Bain was the one who had killed his entire family before committing suicide. They pointed out that investigators had only considered David as a suspect and did not collect and preserve evidence properly. It's not even clear if samples of Robin's fingernails had ever been taken. Blood evidence was found on his shoes and his clothes, but this was never presented in court. Instead, the photo of his body is shown and no blood evidence can be seen. Robin also had 2 marks on his palm consistent with loading a magazine, suggesting that he had been holding the rifle. However, fingerprint experts examined the original autopsy fingerprint forms and compared them to marks seen in the photos of Robin Bain's thumb and forefinger. They concluded it was strongly indicative the marks in the photos were minor superficial damage to the skin's surface, police said. An ESR firearms expert also carried out tests on the weapon used in the homicides. Police said these tests were used to replicate residue marks which were similar in appearance and position to the marks shown in the photographs of Robin Bain's fingers. The scientists concluded there was considerable doubt to the shape, dimensions and colour of the marks on Robin Bain's thumb. And then again, the issue of Robin being right-handed but having shot himself on the left side was raised in court. The defence brought in a forensic firearm expert. Philip Bryce, in a dramatic demonstration, proved to the court that Robin Bain could quite easily have shot himself in the head in the left temple. He even showed various positions.
An overseas firearms expert has told David Bain's murder retrial that it would have been easy for the accused father to shoot himself.
David Bain is charged with murdering his family, but the defence called in the expert to support the theory that Robin Bain killed the family, then himself. Vicky Wilkinson-Baker has the details.
A demonstration in court, a defence witness showing how Robin Bain could have shot himself.
I can actually see I can quite easily reach the trigger in that position.
The UK ballistics expert found it just as easy using a chair.
I can reach it with any of my fingers and my thumb.
This is crucial evidence for the defence. David Bain is accused of murdering all 5 members of his family, but his lawyers are trying to show his father killed them before turning the gun on himself.
What view did you reach as to the likelihood or otherwise of suicide?
I would say more likely than not, based on the fact that I'm interpreting the wound as a contact near contact and how essentially easy it is for a person of Robin Bain's stature to actually reach the trigger.
This view different to that of 3 prosecution witnesses who all believed it was either unlikely or impossible for Robin Bain to commit suicide.
In my view, it would be simply impossible to self-inflict the injury.
Robin Bain was found on the floor as though he'd fallen backwards. The defence say that's consistent with their scenarios. The Crown disagrees.
Seems to defy common sense, I suggest, that somebody bending over in that direction is going to fall backwards.
The normal thing I've seen when people are shot, they buckle at the knees and they go backwards.
This week it's the battle of the experts, with the defence focusing on scientific and forensic evidence in an effort to discredit the Crown case. Vicky Wilkinson-Baker, One News.
David's defence team also conducted footprint tests with David Bain. He wore socks dipped in cow's blood. He walked and his prints averaged 306 millimetres, some even going as big as 312 millimetres, but never under 300 millimetres. The prints found at the scene were 280 millimetres long, much closer in size to Robin's right foot, which measured 270 millimetres long. On the 5th of June 2009, David Bain was acquitted on all 5 counts of homicide.
Madam Foreperson, please stand. Members of the jury, have you unanimously agreed upon your verdicts? On the first count of the murder of Robin Irving Bain, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the second count of the murder of Margaret Cullen Bain, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the third count of the murder of Stephen Robin Cullen Bain, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the fourth count of the murder of Laniet Margaret Cullen Bain, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the fifth count of the murder of Arawa Mary Cullen Bain, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Yes. Okay, you all agree, members of the jury? Yes. Be seated, please.
Yes. You may leave the dock, Mr. Bain.
He'd spent 13 years in prison. His was the most expensive trial in New Zealand's history, totaling $1.2 million. In 2012, Ian Binney, a retired Justice of the Supreme Court in Canada, reviewed the Bain case. He advised the New Zealand government that Dunedin's police investigation was riddled with egregious errors, and that extraordinary circumstances in this case warranted a settlement to David Bain. Binney was right in calling out the police for their mistakes. For example, they did not test Robin or David's hands for gunshot residue. Scrapings from Robin's fingernails were never analysed and were destroyed. There could potentially have been tissue from Stephen proving that Robin was the killer. Both Justice Binney's investigation and his interview with David Bain has been discussed widely. His recommendation has been criticised for being biased towards David Bain and described as an incomplete picture that did not consider all the evidence. In fact, his advice was turned down by the New Zealand government. A new report was ordered, this time from a retired Australian judge. Ian Callanan contradicted Binney's findings and concluded that David Bain's innocence had not been proven at the trial. In the end, David Bain received an ex gratia payment of $925,000, with the condition that he promised not to take any further legal action. This payment was not made as compensation for wrongful conviction, which means that the New Zealand government is still sceptical about David Bain's innocence. Shortly after David Bain's retrial, controversy sparked yet again. The full recording of David's 111 call was released to the public. He's hysterical, out of breath, and most of his statements are audible. But there is a small section where his speech becomes muffled. Experts tried to decipher what he was saying under his breath. One version is that David said, "I shot the prick," while another concluded that he said, "I can't breathe."
Kia ora, good evening, and stand by to hear what the jury never heard at David Bain's retrial. It's a small piece of audio edited out of the 111 call that Bain made. The jury never heard it because it was not considered relevant or reliable. But today, the Supreme Court said the material could be made public. Listen for yourself. See if you can make out what, if anything, is said. We're going to play it twice. According to a detective who listened to that in 2007, David Bain can be heard saying, "I shot the prick." In other words, a kind of confession. But if you missed it, you're not alone. Experts disagree on whether there are even words there. Maybe it's just the sound of breathing.
This is hard to interpret, and it could be down to hearing what you want to hear. And ultimately, the evidence is not strong enough to prove that David is the killer. The court decided that it was inadmissible, and forensic consultants in both New Zealand and as well as in the UK concluded that it was merely a meaningless exhalation of breath. After his acquittal, David Bain took a 3-month trip to Europe, paid for by his supporters. When he returned, he struggled to find a job, but finally landed an engineering job at an Auckland firm in March 2012. In January 2014, he married a Christchurch school teacher, Liz Davies. She was the daughter of one of his supporters. 1 year later, they had a son. David changed his own name to William David Cullen Davies, taking his wife's last name and including his mother's. But despite his acquittal, David's case still divides the country. Many books have been written, all studying the same evidence and coming to different conclusions. Joe Karam, David's fiercest defender, has written 4 books just himself. Robin Bain's brother Michael has come out in his brother's defence. He feels that the allegations against Robin are purely hearsay and that the police did their job by arresting David shortly after the murders. He feels very disappointed that David made no efforts to defend his father and allowed his reputation to be dragged over the coals. Over the years, some people's opinion of the Bain family murders have changed, while others remain steadfast. All that we can say for certain is that the members of the Bain family did not deserve to die. If Robin was the killer, it was a cruel gesture to leave his son to face the music. But if he was in such a state of depression that he had killed everybody else, who's to say that he had any logical thoughts? If David was the killer, he made many mistakes, pointing the investigators straight to him. And despite his strange behaviour both before and after the murders, more than one psychologist has found no signs of mental or personality disorders in David, other than post-traumatic stress after the shootings. This was consistent with somebody who had discovered his entire family slaughtered, rather than a sociopathic killer. Unfortunately, in a case that is every bit as messy as the house at 65 Every Street, Andersons Bay, Dunedin, there will always be a question mark over the outcome of this story. If only the walls could talk before they were burnt to cinders. Okay, if you're still with me, thank you so much for sticking this out for 3 amazing parts. It is a roller coaster of a story, and now I'm going to share my own opinion. I feel like if Robin was the killer and David is innocent, he is the unluckiest man in New Zealand history. How could it be that Robin committed 5 horrendous murders without leaving a single bit of actual evidence to show that he had done it? And yet there was a ton of circumstantial evidence that David needed to consistently explain away. Not only did Robin not leave any evidence behind, but he created evidence that pointed directly to David. Seems a very cruel gesture for somebody who wanted to leave the only person who deserved to stay alive. My personal opinion is that David did it. And I read a really interesting article on Medium that suggested that David may have done it because of his religious beliefs, and that he may now truly believe that his mind and soul did not commit the murders, but that his body in fact did. The way that he struggled in the days following, it seems like he was kind of coming to terms with the fact that he actually could have committed these crimes, but that he mentally blocked it out, and so he genuinely doesn't think that he did it. I just can't ignore the absolute avalanche of physical evidence suggesting that David did it. It just seems too unlikely to me that with all of that to consider, that it could have been Robin. I do agree that the question of motive is a very contentious one. I don't know why David did it. I don't know why he would. If the incest allegations are to be believed, then Robin certainly has a better motive for murder, but the actual facts of the day and what we know and the evidence we have, it just doesn't line up, and you cannot believe that somebody's guilty of murder through pure speculation and hearsay. There's nothing physical to prove that anything happened, any of this happened, nothing. So, I don't know. I think David did it, and I think I'll always believe that. I've obviously done a lot of research and reading this. I understand where David's supporters are coming from, but I just cannot ignore the hard facts in this case. This story has divided not only the nation, but my own inner circle. My mum is a firm believer of Robin's guilt. She will not be swayed. While myself and my boyfriend, we firmly believe that David did it. My best friend thinks that Robin did it. So, you know, even now in 2021, all these years later, people still have differing opinions on what happened. So I don't think we'll ever know. I think this is just one that we will discuss for years and years and years to come, until another contentious case happens. But as it turns out, nothing has ever happened like this in New Zealand before, and maybe it never will. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me. If you liked this video, please go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Bye.